The average salary where I live is $50,000 a year. If I asked 100 people making that salary if they thought that they could become millionaires on that salary, most of them would probably laugh at me. But I think that they're wrong. Becoming a millionaire has a lot less to do with how much you make and a lot more to do with what you do with the money that you do make. Now, a quick disclaimer as usual, this is not financial advice. I'm not a financial advisor. This is purely for educational purposes only. So people think that becoming wealthy requires one of the following. First off, a six-figure salary. People think you need to be making at least $100,000 a year. And, even $100,000 a year nowadays is a lot less than it was in, even say 5 to 10 years ago. So people think that that is a requirement. Second, winning the lottery. People say, most people can't get rich unless they win it big. They win the lottery. Third, people think that they need to start a huge business, a super successful business that brings in all this money and makes them a millionaire. And then fourth, people think that becoming a millionaire means just simply getting lucky, whether that be with the job you get, the salary that you get with that job, other things that happen in your life. People think that you need to get lucky to become a millionaire. And while yes, sometimes it does require, you could say, a little bit of luck, none of those things are definitive and are absolutely needed in order to become a millionaire. Those things that I just mentioned can absolutely make you wealthy, but they're not the only path, and that's something that not a lot of people realize or know about. So step one, the first step is to start early. So for comparison, if somebody starts at 20 years old investing the same amount of money as a person who starts investing when they're 35, the person when they're 20 is always going to beat the person who started when they're 35 simply because one of the biggest factors of wealth, outside of obviously money making you more money, is time. Time in the market and the time for that money to grow. Now, of course, eventually, if the person that is 35 puts in a lot more contributions, yes, they will end up with more money than the person who started when they're 20. But the point is, if you start earlier with the same amount, you're going to be more successful than when someone starts later, obviously. And it takes a lot more for that person who starts later in terms of contributions to actually catch up to and then eventually surpass the person who started when they're 20, even if the person who started when they were a lot younger is contributing lower dollar amounts. So to put it plainly, time is the greatest asset. And with respect to starting early, your first dollar invested is worth far more than your last. So you want to try to get as many dollars invested as you can as early on as you can. Step two is to live below your means. Lifestyle inflation is one of the biggest killers of wealth for every single person. Right, you guys have seen it all. You get a raise, the person jumps in immediately to a car loan, which has just a ridiculous interest percentage that keeps them paying off this car for years and years and years, and they're paying way more than the car is worth in interest. Another good example would be designer clothes. This is one conversation I recently just had with somebody. For me personally, I don't care to go buy, say for example, a Gucci t-shirt that costs hundreds of dollars just because it has the Gucci logo on it. People see that as a status and see, oh, someone's wearing Gucci or they're wearing this designer clothing brand, they must be rich. But for me personally, first off, that's just not my style. I don't like wearing really designer things. I prefer to just keep it plain shirts, plain clothes, because I think that looks nicer. And also, I'm spending so much less money than the person who is buying all designer clothes just to look rich. So you really have a choice. You can increase your lifestyle or you can increase your investments. And I choose almost every time to increase my investments. Now, I always mention, yes, sure, there's certain times in your life where I absolutely think increasing your lifestyle or, buying something that's going to make you happy, even in the short term. Of course, yeah, I think from time to time that's okay, right? You don't know how long life is. It's important to enjoy it, but it's also important to be responsible about your future as well. So step three is to pay yourself first. And this is another very, very important point. For me, I get my income, I pay off my bills that I have to pay, I go into investments with auto investments, and then other is the last category. And I usually don't spend much in the other category because I try to keep my spending to a minimum. Remember, every dollar you invest is a dollar that works for you. If you stay disciplined, eventually your investments will make more in a year than you do, which is an absolutely crazy thought to think that your investments are going to make more than you working hard throughout an entire year will. Step four would be to invest consistently. Dollar cost averaging, auto investments like I talk about, keep investing whether the market is up or down, and that's how dollar cost averaging works. Another point is to not try to time the market. I believe the saying goes, time in the market is better than timing in the market. If you try to beat the market, 90% of the time, probably even more, I don't know the exact statistic, you're going to lose. And as I always say, if you're young, ride the wave, right? You have all this time, you might as well just consistently invest, enjoy the ride and enjoy the waves of the ups and the downs as you progress through your life, because chances are it is likely going to be a better market than it was, say, however many years ago when you're looking back when you're at a retirement age. And consistency beats perfection, right? It makes it so much easier and less stressful so you don't have to be consistently checking the market to see when it's down so that you know to put money in and trying to decide when a good time is to put money in. That consistency, and again, for me, auto investments, I don't even have to really necessarily pay attention to it unless I'm checking in on it routinely. That's going to beat perfection every time. And the last important point on this step is that investing with dollar cost averaging and auto investing actually removes the emotion from it, which is a big thing. And it's one of the reasons why people fail. One of the big reasons why people fail when they're trying to build wealth is because it's easy to allow emotion to get into it, right? Especially once you're starting to get to these bigger numbers in investing and there feels like a lot more pressure. But if it's automatically doing it for you and you know you're averaging in on the market, a lot of that stress is kind of taken away from you, which is super important. Now, step 5 is to let compound interest work. Don't interrupt the process. Your investments will earn returns. Those returns earn returns. And eventually, growth becomes bigger than your contributions, as I talked about. And that's a really big milestone to reach in your investments, is when you look at what you make in a month or a year and you see that your contributions into your account are actually less than the interest that you're making on your money, you know you're doing significantly well. So what typically stops most people? It's not their income, it's their lifestyle, right? New cars, bigger homes, more subscriptions, keeping up with friends, seeing on social media all these people posting about the great things that they're doing and all these things as they've purchased. All of these options, right? That's what holds people back from building significant wealth. It's like that one saying, I believe it's keeping up with the Joneses. And it really just means that you see what other people have and you, for some reason, think, oh, I have to have that, right? You see someone, go on a vacation, you think, I have to go on a vacation now. Or you see somebody buy a new car and you're like, all right, well, they have a nicer car, so I have to get a nicer car. But that's definitely not the case, right? Nobody really knows behind the scenes what other people's finances are, of course, unless they post them online, which typically is not the case, right? So you don't need to be keeping up with these people. As long as you're happy with what your lifestyle is and how your life is, you don't need to be concerned about what other people are doing. And really, one big quote that I think of a lot is comparison is the thief of joy, right? If you're always comparing yourself to others, you're not going to be happy, especially in the financial scene, right? There's always going to be somebody who is better than you at something or who is doing better financially, right? So you want to make sure that of course, you can set, goals and look at people, be like, I want to be like that person in terms of, how well they're doing financially. But it's important to look at yourself and look in the mirror and just try to be better than the person you were yesterday, a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, and really progress from that. So, people don't usually spend more because they actually need more. They spend more because they earn more, which should not be the case, right? You really have to look at it as, wants versus needs basis. And that's what I do when I'm going to purchase something, right? Or if I'm out in public and I see something that I want, I think, okay, do I need this or do I just want this? And again, like I mentioned earlier, sometimes it is important to get something that you just want rather than you need, because it's important to have those moments in life, right, where you're happy. You can just purchase something. Say for example, you worked hard for the past couple months, you did well financially, et cetera, and you want to buy yourself, a hat or something like that, right? Obviously, that's totally fine, right? It's as long as you are being consistent, you're investing consistently, you're not dipping into your investments, and it's a wise decision. Buying something that is expensive that you're going to throw out after a week, obviously that's not smart and isn't something you should do. But again, at the end of the day, it really is a comparison between wants and needs, and deciding when you're going to purchase something whether you actually need it or not. So let's take a look at a hypothetical example. So let's look at someone who is making $50,000. After tax, where I live, that's $3,055 a month. Some of you probably have heard of the 50-30-20 rule. It essentially means that 50% of your income goes towards your needs, 30% goes towards your wants, and 20% goes towards savings/investments. So if we take 20% of that $3,055 a month you'd be making after tax from a $50,000 salary, that's about $611 per month. Now, a lot of you are probably going to hear this and say, oh, that's not realistic on this kind of salary. It's too much to be investing. Life is expensive. You've got inflation and all these things. And I totally understand that. So sure, let's take that. And let's take that $611 and let's half it. So let's say around $306 a month. So at 20 years old, if you're making $50,000 a year, you invest $306 a month for 45 years. So you start when you are 20 years old and you invest until the average age of retirement, which is 65. You invest in the S&P 500, which has a historical average return of 10%. This blows my mind. The total result absolutely blows my mind. If you invest that $306 a month, which again is half of what the general recommendation is with the 50-30-20 rule of investing your income, you would end up with a little under $2.8 million at the average age of retirement. So it is possible. It is absolutely possible to become a millionaire on an average salary. So my personal philosophy is, for example, I talked about it in a recent video. For my last raise, I kept almost the exact same lifestyle and I just doubled my investments, right? Again, as I mentioned, it's important every now and then, right? Say you go to a dinner when you have a raise or something like that. That's totally normal, right? But in terms of my investments, I pushed harder on them because I now was making more money rather than inflating my lifestyle. So if you're making an average salary, don't let anyone convince you that wealth is out of reach. You won't become a millionaire overnight, but you don't need overnight. You just need consistency. And that's because time can do what income can't. So that's the end of today's video, guys. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comment section down below. Hopefully you guys took something from today's video. If you're new, hopefully you subscribe for more content like this if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys in the next video.